Welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 189. I am your co-host, Russ.
I'm your co-host, Mike.
It's been an interesting week, as usual, in the music world and in our music listening. Before we roll into this week, I've got a few thanks I want to get out, Mike. First of all, thanks to Gleam Records in Italy for sharing last week's episode, where we featured bassist Giuseppe Venezia's I've Been Waiting for You with trumpet wonder Fabrizio Bosso.
Yeah, what a great record that was.
Yeah, that's going to be one of my favorites from this year, I think. Be sure to check that out. Also want to give thanks to Thomas Hanlein, saxophonist from Germany, for sharing a clip from our episode 2 weeks ago with our guest co-host Jason Kaiser. We featured Jason's recording Kind of Kenny, and Thomas shared a clip of him talking about his own record, 3-in-1. And so that'll get us some more listeners and attention to those recordings. Be sure to check all of those out, all really fine recordings. Unfortunately, this week we've got some bad news again, Mike.
Yeah, some real heavy hitters passed away this week.
Two big names in the jazz world. So let me get over to the piano to get things rolling here. First of all, on November 9th, we lost alto saxophonist Lou Donaldson, who passed away at the age of 98 years old.
That's a really long life.
He was from North Carolina. When he was young, he enlisted in the Navy in World War II. His first recordings were with Milt Jackson and Thelonious Monk in 1952, and he played with trumpeter Blue Mitchell, pianist Horace Silver, and drummer Art Blakey. In 1953, he recorded sessions with trumpeter Clifford Brown and Philly Joe Jones, and he was a member of Art Blakey's quintet for the Hard Bop recording sessions at Birdland in February of 1954, from which come the A Night at Birdland albums for Blue Note Records. Those are favorites of mine going all the way back to high school. I listened to those a lot. And later he went on to develop a reputation as a soul jazz player. And one of his recordings holds some memories for you, Mike.
The Alligator Boogaloo, yeah, I just kind of like that record. That's really his most famous record, I think, as far as like popular music goes. I remember reading, too, that their album was short, and they just came up with that on the spot as like an extra track, and that was the one that sold. He wasn't too happy about that, but, you know, you take what you can get. I've got a few of his albums on the analog recordings release from back in the early 2010s.
Oh, right. All those Super Audio CDs.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They sound great. And so I was listening to those this week. He has a really nice kind of playful sort of style. Like I feel like there's a lot of good nature in the music he made. So that was true of Alligator Boogaloo, too. Yeah, that comes from 1967. And Donaldson retired in 2018, and he performed his final shows in 2017. So rest in peace, Lou Donaldson. And another big name, drummer Roy Haynes, passed away on November 12th at the age of 99 years old. Well, you can't say they didn't live all the way through. Right. They both reached the finish line. I think we can be happy about that, you know.
Absolutely.
It's good long lives.
Haynes played in swing, bebop, fusion, and a little bit into the avant-garde styles of jazz. He started his full-time professional career in 1945 in Boston, where he hailed from. In the 40s and 50s, he played with Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, Wardell Gray, Stan Getz, and Sarah Vaughan. And the list goes on and on. Thelonious Monk, Sonny Rollins, Kenny Burrell, Eric Dolphy, McCoy Tyner. With McCoy Tyner, he was on a Grammy Award-winning album in 1987, Blues for Coltrane, and then another Grammy Award winner in 1997 with Gary Burton and Chick Corea, Like Minds. He was also a frequent winner of Downbeat Magazine's Readers and Critics polls. So rest in peace, the great Roy Haynes at the age of 99.
Yeah, both will be missed from the golden age of jazz back in the mid-20th century.
They went right through the whole development of all modern jazz.
In a way, to jazz, they're sort of like the way those filmmakers who started in silent films and went all the way to the end of the 20th century were to movies.
Right.
You know, they just saw the whole development. Amazing.
All right, now we'll get into this week's music, and in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist that's almost all of the music in one place on Deezer this week. There's one recording that's missing, but I'll talk about that later. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. And if you can't see the full description or recording list and links on your app or wherever you listen to us, you can always come over and check us out on our host site, which is Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything is easy to follow there. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend or any musician friends that you have. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, which is another way we can reach new listeners. You can come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. I put up a bunch again from this past Friday. You can leave a message or comment on Facebook as well. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to play music samples tonight as usual, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoyed the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists.
Hey, we listen to the complete recordings. Listeners, you can too.
Absolutely.
You know, I think this podcast is listened to mostly by people in the industry because they're the only people we ever hear from. You know,
it seems like it.
You know, the artists, the record label people, you know, they write to us quite frequently, but we still haven't gotten an email from just a casual listener.
That's true. It's all musicians and labels and publicity agents. So any listeners out there, drop us a line.
Yeah, we want to know you're there. Just tell us, hey, I listened to you. You know, you don't have to tell us if we're good or not. You know. Well, I guess if you're listening, you must like something, so there you go.
Hey, where else are you going to get this combination of music? Not from your algorithm.
Yeah, well, nowhere. That's where you're going to get it. You have to come here.
Speaking of which, we're going to go right back in time to start out the program this week, Mike.
Yeah, in fact, with the 3 albums that I've programmed this week, I had to do some serious unpacking on all 3 of them because they're all like unfamiliar music, even to me. So I had to kind of go back and do some research. And let's just start in with our Baroque era offering. This is an album called C Interludes, Keyboard Music from Baltic Tablatures around 1600.
That's a Jeopardy category, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it probably is. It's a Jeopardy category that even a music scholar like me wouldn't choose because I know nothing about this, or I know a little bit about it now because of this album. But this is by Corina Marti on the harpsichord, and it's on the Dux label, released October 10th. And it's very long. It's an hour and 23 minutes of solo harpsichord music. And most of those pieces are about 2 minutes long. So there's like 39 tracks on this or something. How many tracks are there? I forgot. Let me just check really quickly. Yeah, 40 tracks. That's a lot.
It's a lot of tracks.
So let me do some unpacking before we listen. Now, if you look into the booklet, you get the title of the work, and then there are all sorts of complicated catalog numbers. They're not going to mean much to listeners. In fact, they're the kind of thing that make listeners not want to hear the album, but they're good for scholars. If you're actually going to do research on any of these, you know where to look for the manuscripts and things like that. But listeners, if you see those numbers, you can ignore them if you're just listening for pleasure. Anyway, the numbers show where in the manuscripts the tablatures can be found. And since we, the listeners, don't have those available to us, I won't mention them. That said, if you want to do research on the works, the booklet commendably gives you all of this information. You don't even have to do a search online or go to a library. It's all in the booklet. So, good work there to the scholarship on this album. Most of the works are by anonymous composers. This is another reason why you're not going to hear them too often. There are a few whose names are listed. I'll mention them as they come up. The booklet notes, which are by a guy with the unpronounceable name Bartolomiej Gembicki, I guess that's close, feature a metaphor regarding the similarity between late 16th and early 17th century keyboard tablatures and the C. And the metaphor is that there are not only a great variety of styles, but also a great variety of types of music, vocal, choral, and it shows that tablatures have no borders, like the C. Get it? It's kind of a stretch of a metaphor, I have to say. This album explores Polish sources of keyboard music which collect music from diverse European cultures. The materials compilation was begun by a certain Jacobus Apfel in one of the 2 sources. He was a student at the Jesuit college in Braniewo, in what is now Poland. Again, Polish names, you're just going to have to work out what I'm saying. and added to by others later. And the other source of the music on this album is a manuscript in the State Archive of Gdansk. The harpsichordist on the album, Corina Marti, has selected the music from the two manuscripts described in Gembicki's notes and arranged them into 4 suites. So the suites are her doing. They're not arranged like this in the booklets. That's important to understand. Now, in these suites, secular and religious compositions coexist harmoniously. Again, you probably have this idea of the borderless sea again. Everything is just kind of mixing together in every which way. There are also a few pieces taken from other tablatures to fill out the suites. The suites begin with formal freedom, providing space for subtle improvisations and fantasies, for which the so-called Gdansk tablature is renowned. The suite's music solidifies in form with dances at the end. And the album is separated into 4 suites, and there's a conclusion as well. Now, on streaming, you're just going to get tracks 1 through 40, and it'll give you the suite numbers. But Suite 4 and the conclusion appear on a second CD. Even though the entire album could have fit on a single CD, it looks like it might have taken some special technology because it goes over the 80 minutes that a normal CD goes. Single CDs now are going up to 86 minutes. I think they're writing on the borders of the
it's pretty incredible,
CD or something. And they play in my players, thankfully. I'd get all mad if they didn't. Anyway, we're ready to listen. Now, I hope you like what you're going to hear. A lot of it's really attractive, but these titles really aren't memorable, and there's no composer on most of them either. So you're just going to have to listen to the album all the way through and just to hear your favorite piece here. Anyway, track 1 from Suite 1. Let's just start with Suite 1. There are 8 pieces in this suite, and Corina Marti, the harpsichordist, has put these together from the source material. Suite 1 starts with Fantasia Primi Toni, and I've come to really love this word Fantasia. Whenever there's a piece called Fantasia from the Baroque era, it always has some really creative sounding music, for the era in it. The first thing I noticed, this is a closely recorded album with a big strong tone from the harpsichord at the beginning. This work is improvisatory. Now please, that doesn't mean it's being improvised. It means that it sounds like an improvisation by whoever the composer was that he wrote down. And it has some appealing chord changes that draw me in. I like the work and Marti's spacious approach to it. Let's get a listen to the opening track. Ooh, there's a nice stopping space right there with the cadence. How about that? Yeah. So we have those creative figures heading towards new, I guess at the time, unexpected harmonies. Makes it sound like an early Italian keyboard work, because they do that very often. This particular piece has a B section midway through that becomes more meditative with appealing chord changes. Track 2, Fuga a quatuor, so 4-voice fugue. Interestingly, the previous piece doesn't resolve on its own, but is set up to resolve into this one. Marti takes a slow, spacious approach to the fugue here, which is also appealing. The melody sort of sounds like stone steps being laid out for us to walk on, a track to guide our steps. It's played slowly, contributing to the effect. See if you can hear what I mean. Those cadences are just coming at the perfect times for me on this podcast. So this is another find, and we're only 2 tracks in. I've really enjoyed both of these pieces so far. But don't worry, there are 38 to go. We're going to sample a lot from the beginning, but as we go on, we'll sample less and less. Anyway, track 3, Chorea, or I guess a chorus or a chorale. This starts way up in the high end of the harpsichord, a sound we rarely hear, and this really caught my ear too. I have to sample this for you. Something kind of Christmassy about that high sound there. It's kind of glass-like in this polyphonic piece. It has two voices like an invention up until the first minute when the harmony is filled in with more decorated melodic line. There's good articulation here by Marti. She has a strong, solid sound. It's a good recording. Track 4, Ein guter Tanz. So we get a dance here. And the title literally means a good dance. Well, thanks. Anyway, and then there's a dash here and it says proportion. This work joyfully sings out with its full chords and confidently articulated melody. It has a deeply satisfying sense of form with cadences strongly articulated. The ending moves into triplet rhythm, and I'm going to sample the beginning. And a whole lot of cadences in there. Ein guter Tanz indeed. Track 5, Fantasia, Quinti Toni. This is kind of like an Italian title. Starts meditatively like the first Fantasia and goes on from there. Once again, there are some intriguing chord changes as the theme goes on in the first minute, a quality I love about music from this late 16th century to early 17th century period. 6, Pavan. This has that chiming tone again that we heard in track 3, in the high end of the harpsichord, with full, strong-sounding chords. It's again a sound we don't hear often enough on the harpsichord, and I suspect this particular harpsichord gets that sound specifically. Right. Others probably don't. It's really magical. So sample that too. Track 7, Fuga a 4 or 4. This fugue starts slowly, as the first one did. I'm really enjoying the sound of Marti's harpsichord. It's got a chiming quality in the high end, and a more resonantly plucked string sound from the middle to the bottom. It gives the effect of different instruments. The instrument, by the way, on this album, is one constructed in 2023 by Volker Plath after a 16th century Italian harpsichord that is now in the Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg and owned by Daniel Trumbull. And it's a pretty magical instrument. I really like the sound of this. Track 8, Polnischer Tanz, and then it says proportion again. The first suite ends with an appealing dance sharply articulated by Marti, its contours thrown rhythmically into high relief, which is deeply satisfying. As is often the custom, the rhythm changes toward the end. Suite 2 starts with another Fantasia, Fantasia Octavi Toni. Again, full-sounding solid chords, sounding here like they're strummed out of a guitar. I'm starting to appreciate Marti's sense of musical space and her evenness of attack, including on the opening rolled chord. Let's hear a little bit of this one for this new suite. Another cadence. Oh, thank you. Again, there's a B section starting about midway through, and the text remains more or less the same throughout. Track 10, Canzone. This one has a composer. It's Hans Leo Hassler. This has some chiming high-range notes on the opening octave harmonies. Let's hear that. The song comes across in a stately manner and sounds like bells ringing out. It's a sound you don't hear in most harpsichords, as I mentioned before, and we hear this harpsichord texture throughout the movement, including the B section, which begins about midway through. Track 11, Clausula in G, gentle and bell-like with high-end trills contributing to the enchanting effect. It's very brief. Track 12, Jungfrau, dein schöne Gestalt. Block chords begin this stately dance-like movement. It starts in the higher end, and then the thematic chords repeat in a lower register. We get a repeat of the material in the enchanting high end of the instrument at the end. Track 13, Preambulum. Petrus de Drusina is the composer here. This starts with an emphatic block chord followed by a pause. The material afterwards works itself out in improvisatory fashion, sounding like an Italian work in its experimentation with the harmony in search of a suitable place to find a cadence. It ends oddly without a cadence. Track 14, Omnes Gentes Plaudite, Manibus. Bright, emphatic block chords begin the piece. It then moves into more melodic material, but again is spaciously played by Marti. I'm beginning to think at this point that this is her style, rather than simply her approach to this particular piece. It's very appealing. Track 15, Ein kurz schlesische Denzlein, Proportio. And this seems to be written by a composer named Amerbach in 1583. You know, that could be the place, too, or the publisher. I'm not really sure. Anyway, it starts with an unharmonized melodic line. It has us wondering whether this will become a fugue, but chords come in once the melodic line is finished. 16, Polnische Tanz, Propors. This is a Polish dance. It sounds stately with its bold block chords. Melodic lines appear, connecting the chords after they first sound. The dance seems to go into slight variations on the theme as it's repeated. Track 17, Alia Fantasia Primi Toni. Starting with a rolled chord, this has an improvised quality in the way the melody unwinds. There's a lot of harmonic experimentation within the chord changes. And track 18, Ein Polnische Tanz, Proportio. This suite ends with an elegant-sounding dance. It's a Polish dance. Marti commendably throws the rhythm into relief, helping the dance quality to register strongly. There's a timbre change to a brighter sound midway through the piece, with the melody in the higher end. Suite 3 begins on track 19 with another Fantasia, Fantasia Secondi Toni. A lot of these works start emphatically, and this one does too, and moves from new harmony to new harmony in the manner of an early Italian harpsichord work. Marti's bold attack is on full display here. It's pretty bold in attack throughout, with bright sound and a mid-range timbre until the end, when the theme moves into the higher range. Track 20, Ein feiner Polnischer Tanz, or a fine Polish dance, Der Sprung drauf. This starts similarly in mood to the earlier piece, but has a similar harmony and dancing rhythm. It's immediately appealing. I think this is worth a sample. All right, that's track 20. We're halfway through the album. Track 21, Deus in adjutorum meum intende. Petrus de Drusina is the composer. This starts slowly at a careful sounding tempo. I like the way Marti makes these types of works seem to creep forward as though they're being stealthy. Let me give you a sample so you'll hear what I mean. Okay, those cadences are pretty quick, and then the music just keeps going on. As the work goes on, and the space between chords is filled in, it gains a sense of a quicker flow. There are also a few odd passing chords that please the ear for the surprise they present. Track 22, Tanz, or Dance. This piece starts in the highest chiming range of this particular harpsichord. It seems that each suite features a piece like this, and they grab the ear instantly. 54 seconds in, the piece acquires its dance rhythm and proceeds in a more or less traditional manner in the mid to upper range of the instrument. The harmony completely filled out. There's another section in the very high end with mid-range accompaniment, which brings the piece to its conclusion. Track 23, Aria Polonica, Tanek. This sounds more like a dance than an aria with its highly marked rhythm, but it does have an attractive melody, and let's hear that melody. The piece reverts to triple meter midway through, always a pleasing effect. Track 24, Tuniek and Polonica. Heavy block chord downbeats define this dance. The rhythm varies toward the end with the opening melodic material always present. Track 25, Herzlich tut mich erfreuen. This is by Jakob Regnart and starts as a single unharmonized line. This time, a harmonizing second voice comes in, providing more of a harmonic definition than counterpoint. It changes midway through to a triple meter and with a Sicilian rhythm, and then moves unexpectedly right back to the more square quadruple meter for the conclusion. Track 26, Vulnerasti cor meum. Stark chords begin the piece with a strong downbeat. It gradually becomes more melodic as the work goes on, until at the very end, the melodic line features ornamentation. Track 27, Tanz. Played high in the instrument's register, this work comes across as thoroughly charming. It's only 30 seconds long, though, and one almost wants to hear it again once it's over. It's very charming. All right, now we get to Suite 4. This is track 28. If you happen to have the CD, it's track 1 on CD 2. I'm going to give the streaming track numbers as opposed to going through CD 2. You'll just have to follow along as best you can if you have the CD. Anyway, Suite 4, track 28, Alia Toni Terti Fantasia. There's something faintly Spanish about the chords at the opening of this Fantasia. Listen. I should have said something faintly Spanish about the harmony, not necessarily when the chords come down. Yeah, it proceeds like an early Italian Baroque work, heading to new harmonies via bridges of thematic material. There are some passages toward the end that alter the rhythm and stand out for that. This is a pretty busy, fairly complicated work, and you heard a bit of that in the sample. It ends on an unresolved chord. We go to track 29, Ardente. The thematic material again acts as a bridge between the chord patterns, but this doesn't explore new harmonies in the same way the previous piece did. It's more harmonically stable and comfortable, but it seems to use the same approach. It ends on a solid tonic after a thematic line that sounds like it's going to waver into another key. It's got a fun ending. Track 30, Polnische Tanz, or Polish Dance. It's a light dance with a charming theme. The texture here is uncrowded, and the attack has a softer texture to it. It's very brief. Track 31, In Domino Laudabitur Anima Mea. Starts with an arpeggiated chord like the opening Fantasia. There's a solidity to the harmony here. It's a religious work, I guess there would be, or maybe based on a religious work, given the title. I guess the melody line is supporting what was originally a vocal line. The chords ring out stably while the melodic line decorates its material heavily. There are passages that become more virtuosic as the piece progresses. Track 32, Tanz. There are a lot of pieces on this album that are just called Tanz, and there's no composer. So you just have to go by the catalog numbers to know which one it is. It's very short at 20 seconds and simply moves through the melody once. Track 33, Saltus, has a charming lilt to it, and I'm going to sample this. I better get out there because that's already half of the piece. It's very short at 1 minute long. Track 34, Passo Mex. This is like a passo mezzo, which is an Italian Baroque era dance. It has a splashy opening chord, and the dance itself is played with heavily accented chords on the downbeats. It sounds like a country dance here. The melodic line picks up in energy in the second half of the piece and has added ornaments. Next we get a piece by Hans Leo Hassler again, Chiara e Lucente Stella. This is track 35, or track 8 on CD2. This is played high in the range of the harpsichord. The light chiming sound seems to represent the twinkling stars of the title. And we have to hear this again, this sound, because it's so great, and we're not going to hear it probably ever again on the podcast. So here we go. I've become attracted to the high sound this particular harpsichord makes. It's unique to my experience of harpsichords. Track 36, Tanz. The suite concludes with a mid-tempo, stately dance, very appealing and straightforward. And then we get to the conclusion. This is track 37, Alia Fantasia Sexti Toni. The piece starts carefully with 2 notes leading to the first harmony. The texture fills out from there. This is a pretty brief fantasia, yet is attractive in its thematic material. I'm going to start this in a little bit from around the 30-second mark when it gets going a bit. I found the material here to be very appealing. Track 38, Corea, a quick, attractive dance piece, and a brief one too, at under a minute. Track 39, Fuga Francese. This is by Giovanni Gabrieli, a pretty well-known Italian Baroque era composer. I believe he worked in Venice. Gabrieli's fugue is pretty involved. It starts slowly and seems to be in 4 voices. The material does resolve into chords at times, but the fugal entries are clearly delineated. The lines seem to go in and out of fugal material and get into some knotty harmonic areas at times, but these pass quickly. Just after the 4-minute and 30-second mark, there's a change of timbre on the harpsichord to a more bell-like sound. The piece still has imitative voices, but these often blend into chords to support a single line. And we arrive at the final track, number 40, Ein preußischer Tanz, der Sprung drauf. I don't know what that means. I should have looked it up. Some kind of dance, though. Marti gives the final piece on the album a bit of a veiled tone. It starts somberly, but slowly picks up in energy as the thematic material is repeated. Let's just hear the opening. It's funny how it stays on that same kind of like harmony for like a long period of time. I guess it's not as veiled as much as it's on the softer part of the harpsichord, the single string. The piece is varied in mood and in rhythm, and there's a Siciliano rhythm given to the theme at the beginning of the first minute. The piece then reverts to its opening for the theme's final statement. Now, first of all, before I conclude, I need to thank Corina Marti for sending me the booklet for this CD, because there's just no way I would have known anything about what I was listening to on this. So thank you for that, Ms. Marti.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, very helpful. And I want to say, there's a lot of very appealing music on this album, and it's a shame we'll rarely hear them again, simply because they're by anonymous composers and therefore fall through the programming cracks. The album starts so appealingly that it's hard to stop listening. I was so taken in by the first few tracks, and we get a lot of music at 83 minutes. The sounds produced by Corina Marti on this particular harpsichord are beguiling, particularly for me when she goes up in the high end of the instrument for its Christmas handbell-like chiming sound. The harpsichord produces different timbral effects throughout its range. Marti has woven these isolated pieces into satisfying suites, giving them a flow that's greater than the sum of their parts. Marti also has a knack for bringing out the appeal of each of these works. The concept of C interludes, I think, really is a bit of a stretch. The interludes part I understand because they're all very short pieces. Even the cover art depicts Ms. Marti with a sea design behind her, with one of the boats in the design looking like it's perched on her head like a hat. But after hearing the album, I'm not really associating the variety of works presented in these handmade suites with the sea, despite understanding what's meant by the metaphor. As I said, though, interludes these works are. They're brief and attractive, and even memorable, yet we just don't hear them because they're not associated with any particular composer. The program itself is inventive, and the work that went into organizing the suites from the enormous amount of material presented in the manuscripts is apparent. The album is a great way to discover unfamiliar music from the Baroque era in all its abundance.
It's an interesting collection of suites and a total program of music. There's certainly a lot included, so you might need more than one listening session to take it all in with your full concentration.
I suggest 4 listening sessions, by the way.
I do like this time period for compositions with harmonic surprises, and there are quite a few of them throughout the program here. As Mike pointed out, there are a number of pieces that get up higher in the range of the harpsichord than we usually hear, and those are kind of charming. Marti does a fine job putting across the varied pieces with fitting expression, and the harpsichord here has a charming tone and ring to it, sounding especially nice in that upper register. So, for any fans of Baroque music and harpsichord, you can't lose with this recording. There's a lot to enjoy.
Yeah, it's all appealing and it's all unfamiliar. All right. In classical music in the early 20th century, music from Bali, particularly the gamelan sound, the big ensemble, the big percussion ensemble from Bali and from Java, had a huge influence on early 20th century Western composers. And it really continues to have that influence too, but it really started in the early 20th century, and composers started applying its percussive effects to the piano mostly. Now we have an album here that's based on this type of music. It's called Srikandi, and it's by Duo Saraswati, a duo that consists of Jan van der Plas on the cello and his brother Chris van der Plas on the piano. This was released by the Challenge Classics label on September 27th, 2024. And first, I'd like to thank Duo Saraswati for sending me a digital booklet for this album, because as with the previous album, without the notes, I'd have had to do a lot of research and probably wouldn't have found most of the information on the anthology of Indonesian classical music on tracks 6 to 14. In fact, I still don't know much about these composers, but we'll get to that. Okay, the two brothers on this recording have a Dutch father and Balinese mother. They programmed the album with works that all show the influence of Balinese music, although I'm not sure about the last work. We'll get to that. The title of the album is based on the song Srikandi, written by Mohtar Embut. Srikandi is a character from the Javanese legend Mahabharata. Born as a man and later transformed to a woman, she fights against evil spirits on the island of Java and falls in love with the brave Arjuna. All right, let's start with Colin McPhee. This is tracks 1 and 2. McPhee lived from 1900 to 1964. And this is from his collection of Balinese ceremonial music, and this is arranged by Duo Saraswati. McPhee transcribed hundreds of pieces from Balinese villages, initially for 2 pianos, in an effort to preserve and share Balinese gamelan, which was under threat to be lost due to changing political and cultural situations with the rest of the world. The first track is called Gambangan, and the transcription also appears in Benjamin Britten's ballet, The Prince of the Pagodas, which, by the way, there's a new recording out now. I may have to hear that as well. You can hear the open sound of the octaves in the opening of the piano. Then we get that wonderful percussive sound in the piano as the cello sings out a melody. Interestingly, the gamelan style interpreted on the piano reminds me a bit of Philip Glass. I wonder now how much of his compositional technique comes from the gamelan. Let's hear the opening of this piece. Track 2, Taboe Teloe, and my apologies to the brothers for not knowing how to pronounce these words. This has a wavering tone on the cello, playing a vocal line that sounds foreign to Western ears. The piano then comes in with hammering, repeating chords. The piano line mimics the gamelan and picks up some of the gamelan's magical, shimmering, otherworldly quality as the piece goes on. The cello's melody also brings us to an unfamiliar but appealing place. Track 3, Bela Bartok, composer we know very well. This is from his collection of graded piano pieces, Mikrokosmos, Book 4, which is the highest level book. Number 109, From the Island of Bali. This is a work for solo piano. Chris van der Plas plays this lightly in the higher end of the piano, It sounds simple, but it's really the touch that puts this across. It gets more emphatic at the 40-second mark where we hear octaves. A lot of these harmonies are octaves and fifths. Bartók presents different phrases followed by pauses. It sounds like he's putting different melodies from various gamelan compositions together here, though of course I can't say for sure. Tracks 4 through 5, this is another discovery for me. Alexandre Tansman, La Tour du Monde en Miniature. Tansman traveled the world and wrote a solo piano work with elements from all over the world. In these two works, you can hear the influence from Javanese, this is track 4, which has a mellower sound, and Balinese, the bolder sounding gamelan. Now track 4, the Javanese one, is number 9 in this collection of works, La Flûte de Bambou dans la Forêt Bandoeng, Java. This is for solo piano. The piano starts with a light tone with a repeating, rocking back and forth bass line and a pentatonic melody in the right hand. Let's hear it. And it's a fairly brief piece, so I'd better get out of it there. Track 5, this is the 10th piece in Tansman's collection, Le Gamelan de Bali, Wayang Théâtre d'Ombre. I guess the shadow puppet, the shadow theater. The piano octave melody has an appealing melody at the beginning, short phrases followed by long pauses. The light percussive rhythmic patterns that follow after the 40-second mark fall on the ear like a light rain. This ends at 1 minute and 14 seconds, and the opening comes back. I want to catch a bit of both of this, so I'm going to start it around the 1 minute and 25 second mark in this sample. Intriguing and beautiful sound on the piano as well.
Yeah.
The light percussive section comes back, but now with different registers and melodic elements. At the end, the opening melody repeats, now in a higher register in the right hand. This is a magical piano piece. Seek it out, pianists. Actually, I would like to hear the entire suite and go around the world with Alexandre Tansman and see what he comes up with. Okay, so the heart of this album is probably tracks 6 through 14, Anthology of Indonesian Classical Music, Book 1, Art Song. These are all arranged by Duo Saraswati. These are arranged songs gathered under the title Indonesian Art Song, which itself is part of the Anthology of Indonesian Classical Music. The songs are poetic and explore Indonesian themes or known characters from Indonesian mythology. Track 6 is by the composer who is the most featured here, Mokhtar Embut, a piece called Rambut. There's a beautiful light touch by Chris van der Plas on the piano. The cello is back for these works, and Jan van der Plas plays with a very lightly bowed tone. The piece is brief, but very beautiful. Let's hear a sample. And I better get out of it there, otherwise we'll hear the whole thing. Just want to leave you with a little bit of a tease there, listener. Track 7, Zjafi Embut, Chempaka Kuning, which means yellow chempaka flower. The piano line starts in song-like manner, almost like a Western art song. The cello plays a gentle melody with rippling arpeggiated chords in the accompaniment. I'd like to hear what this sounds like with gamelan accompaniment, actually.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah. Track 8, Mokhtar Embut again, Srikandi. This is the piece that the album is named after. It starts much like the previous piece with a repeating theme in the piano, and then the cello comes in singing the song melody. I find the piano accompaniment here to be magical, so I'm going to start this at about the 30-second mark. The cello melody is light but has a yearning quality to it. Track 9, Mokhtar Embut again, Angin Jahat. Starts with boldly played octave theme in the piano, which the cello then repeats. It sounds a bit martial, or at least masculine. Track 10, Mokhtar Embut Kekasi. This has a pretty and rather short opening theme in the piano, followed by the charming continuation in the cello. Let's hear a sample. And the piece pretty much continues in that way. Track 11, Iskandar. This is the only piece by this composer here. Kisah Mawar de Malam Hari, or Story of the Rose at Night. This has a slower, almost romantic theme in the piano, sounding like it's setting up a Western art song, but then the gamelan influence comes in as arpeggios ripple out of the piano accompaniment as the cello sings its melody. Let's hear that. This really does sound like a combination of Balinese gamelan and Western art song. The cello melody is lovely. Track 12, Mokhtar Embut Sentitik Embun. These songs go by fast. The opening piano line here puts me in mind of Federico Mompo's Canción y Danzas. The song itself goes through many emotional registers, coming in with a sweeping romantic melody at the 40-second mark or so. Track 13, Mokhtar Embut again, Senja di Pelubuhan Perahu. The cello plays this melody in its lower end. The piano lightly accompanies with chords. The piece sounds more Western than the rest, except that the melodies are brief and stick to pentatonic scales. And track 14, Mokhtar Embut again, Sandiwara. The piano here has a Western-style melodic theme, which the cello picks up. The technique here seems to pick up both Western and Indonesian influences. Let's hear a sample of this. It sounds like a good-natured folk tune. Track 15, Claude Debussy, Image Book 2, This is the second of the 3 pieces in that book, titled Et la lune descend sur le temple qui fut. Now, it means, and the moon descends on the temple that was. And it's a gamelan-based piece. Debussy wrote several piano pieces inspired by gamelan, and all of them are magical. This one is probably the most complex, and it's good programming to have this more involved piece after the Indonesian songs, which are simpler and more straightforward. They're more folk-like. This piece begins with a tolling bell sound, inspired by gamelan, of course. It's interesting to hear this rather well-known work in this context, as the gamelan elements leap out at you after hearing the songs in the anthology that we just heard. Debussy keeps the piano texture lightly percussive, and Chris van der Plas draws that element out. I hear this more as percussive patterns in this context and performance. It kind of comes across differently than it does as the middle piece in its original suite, and I'd like to sample this from around the 2-minute and 15-second mark. The textures are delicate and are beautifully put across here. Track 16, George Crumb, a composer I did not expect to hear on this album. Sonata for solo cello. This is his second movement, Tema pastorale con variazioni. This movement from Crumb's sonata uses the pentatonic scale, which is a core element in gamelan. It results in a lot of fifths in the music. The opening theme has a dance-like quality. It's nice to hear the cello play solo finally on this album, so let's hear a bit of the opening. And finally, we have the 5-movement cello sonata in C major, opus 65, by Benjamin Britten. And this is the piece I mentioned at the beginning. I'm kind of wondering what it's doing on this album. I think they just wanted to play it. It may have pentatonic scales in it, and Benjamin Britten did rather famously go to Bali with Peter Pears to listen to Balinese gamelan music, and it figures heavily in his ballet, The Prince of the Pagodas. Anyway, the first movement is titled Dialogo, and let's just hear it before we start talking about it. The piece does mysteriously fit in after the crumb movement that we just heard. So as we heard, the cello plays brief 2- or 3-note phrases while the piano answers with light staccato chords. The next section gets wild, with the 2 instruments seeming to be in some sort of combat. The sound is dry on both instruments. That leaping opening returns after a brief low-key section as the opening section repeats. The brothers take this in a rather playful manner. In the middle section, the cello sticks off into a single note, and then the cello accompanies the piano's chords, often playing a brief single note. A chiming chord section in the piano follows as the cello provides a bed with a wavering legato line. At the very end, we hear a theme resembling the opening in profile, but subtly different. The movement ends in the high end of both instruments. Track 18 is the second movement, Scherzo, played pizzicato. Let's listen to this before I talk about it. So here the cello scurries around pizzicato and the piano imitates it with staccato. The duo bring out a fun quality of the movement. It's got a mischievous energy in their hands. There's some impressive sounding popping of the cello strings at around the 1 minute and 40-second mark. Track 19 is the third movement, Elegia. It starts with a sound like tolling funeral bells. The cello comes in quietly but legato and earnest in tone. The opening arrives at a gentle rocking motion before changing sections at 1 minute and 50 seconds. There's a rather long pause, after which the piano chimes out patterns of 2 notes quietly as the cello plays. The music builds up to a quasi-crisis at 3 minutes and 12 seconds as the piano goes up into the high end, then plays booming bass chords as the cello moans on a vibrato-filled high note. This gradually quietens, and we end the section at 4 minutes and 19 seconds on a sustained bass note. There's quite a variety of rhythm in the various sections of this movement. The movement winds down with the cello going into its low end. Track 20 is the fourth movement, marked Marcia. This march is rather anxious in tone. Most 20th century marches were. The piano plays repeating patterns that are sequenced in a circle. The piano finally settles into an aggressive march with the cello playing figures in sul ponticello tone. The piano follows and winds up high in its range where it sounds chimey. Chris van der Plas gets a pretty tone in this section. And track 21, the fifth and final movement, Moto Perpetuo. The cello starts the Moto Perpetuo, the bow seeming to bounce off the strings. This is very impressive playing, not only by the two individually, but the ensemble as well, how they sort of keep up with each other and really complement each other. The piano starts heading in a tonally upward direction, making only slow progress. The cello starts sawing at the low end aggressively, then the piano comes to the fore with a perpetual motion line. This is one of those movements with a lot of ideas that don't stick around for long, so it's hard to summarize. It's the constant return to perpetual motion that catches the ear, though. At the end, the piano plays a big octave section, bringing the piece to a quick conclusion. This album really is something different. The opening works celebrate the percussive sound of the gamelan via the piano. We constantly hear a percussive piano throughout the album, even in movements of the Britten cello sonata, though that work isn't reminiscent of gamelan music to me. It made me think of how versatile the piano is. Having Debussy's movement from Image et la lune descend sur le temple qui fut really shows its technique in high relief. I also got a bit of a music history lesson in hearing the works by McPhee, Tansman, and the Balinese composers in this anthology. It's wonderful to have an album of gamelan-inspired pieces. I'm not all that knowledgeable about Indonesian music, so I would have liked some information in the booklet about the composers featured in the anthology of Indonesian classical music. This is an album I'd like to have as an example of a creatively programmed concert. The Van der Plas brothers forming duo Saraswati draw out the gamelan influences effectively, and it would be something I would turn to from time to time when my musical mind yearns for the East. It's definitely worth a listen.
These brothers play well together with a unique intuitive sense. I enjoyed the Balinese and Indonesian works and actually wanted to hear more of them. I've been to Indonesia 3 times myself and was charmed by the music there. And I thought that Debussy fits in the program well, being based on works from there. I'm not a huge fan of the Britten sonata, however, that's just me. And I would have liked at least one more Indonesian piece at the end of the program for a little bit of Balinese dessert or something to close it off. But that's a small complaint.
The Britten piece was kind of the odd man out, I thought, on this piece. Bit, it's also the biggest piece on the album, so...
I was just really enjoying those gamelan rhythms and modes going on there, so I wanted more at the end.
Yeah, that said, to Dura Saraswati, it was really a great performance of that Britten piece, though.
It is. It's dynamic.
All right, our final album of the night in classical music, What I Saw in the Water. This kind of keeps to our water theme. I have like a water sandwich here tonight. Yeah. You know, maybe it's like the island of Bali. It's surrounded by water on both sides. Anyway, this is by ChromaDuo. Tracy Ann Smith and Rob McDonald's are on the 2 guitars that we hear. This is released by Naxos on October 11th, 2024. The composers featured on this album are all leading concert guitarists intimately associated with the idioms, culture, and expressiveness of the classical guitar. The first composer that we hear is Simone Iannarelli, who was born in Rome, Italy in the year 1970. So these are all contemporary composers. The piece is called Siete Pinturas de Frida Kahlo from 2006. Iannarelli is a professor of guitar at the University of Colima's Faculty of Fine Arts Music Department in Mexico. He calls this work a promenade over 7 iconic pictures of the famous Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. Each piece tries to recreate the images, atmosphere, inside feelings, or background of these works. Yeah, through different movements, really, we hear all 4 of those things, and more. Track 1 of this 7-movement work, or 7-section work, number 1, Lo que vi en el agua, which means What I Saw in the Water, the title of this album. The work is dreamlike, with harmonies borrowed from Impressionism. The guitars have a watery, descending effect at the opening. Let's hear a bit of that. And we get that watery effect for the title. The 2 guitars sort of overlap in the 2 channels, with most of the activity toward the left channel. The lower accompanying guitar is toward the right channel, and the piece has a wave-like changing texture type of motion to it. I don't know which performer is in which channel, but they're mostly combining at the center a lot. They're not really completely separated. Track 2, number 2, Unos cuantos piquetitos, which means a few small nips. This piece uses special guitar effects to catch the inner suffering of the artist. Oh yes, all artists are suffering inside, including your podcasters, but not because of this podcast. Here we go. It's a lot of interesting sounds coming from 2 guitars.
Yeah, sounds tricky.
Yeah, I'm not sure how those hollow sounding effects are done, but the wiry sound of the opening is clear. Some of the melody is played in unison with ordinary timbre, and there's a quiet section as well. Track 3, number 3, Las Dos Fridas, or the 2 Fridas. This cleverly uses imitative canon to evoke the 2 Fridas of the title. The piece is on the pretty side, with the melody in the upper range and most of the activity in the mid-range. Track 4, number 4, Autoretrato, The Frame. This is a self-portrait, I guess. It also has a watery sound to it with an ostinato in the left channel guitar. It eventually takes over the thematic duties as the right guitar plays an arpeggiated figure. Track 5, number 5, El Sueño, meaning the dream. This also uses impressionistic harmonies, as did track 1. The rhythm has a ticking quality like a clock is tracking the dream. Special effects are used at times, sounding like they involve the nails of the hands. In the middle of the piece, the material dissolves, and after a pause, the opening material returns. Track 6, number 6, Mi Nacimiento, or My Birth. This also uses special guitar effects, as did track 2. It starts with a Spanish-sounding rhythm. Let's hear a little bit of that. Yeah, very cool, and a little anxiety-inducing. There's a lot of metallic tapping heard within the rhythm, and there's also knocking on the body of the guitar. The tapping kind of sounds like a castanet effect. A huge pop on the strings brings the piece to its end. Track 7, the final movement or section of this work, El abrazo de amor de el universo, the loving embrace of the universe. Arpeggiated material evokes the arms of the universe, and the guitar on the left plays a harmonized theme. The piece pretty much continues like this, with a constant arpeggiated flow. The track seems to fade at the end, and I'm wondering if that's a natural fade done by the guitars. If so, it's extraordinarily even. Track 8 is a work by Leo Brouwer, a Cuban composer born in 1939. This is called The Circle Game, after Margaret Atwood, composed in 2021. This is written for ChromaDuo, as are all of the rest of the pieces on this album. The Circle Game is a collection of Margaret Atwood's poems. Now, Margaret Atwood we know best as the author of The Handmaid's Tale. My favorite book by her is called Alias Grace. I'm going to recommend that to you, listeners, but not if you have trouble sleeping at night. Brouwer, in his note, says he prefers to let the music speak for itself. The piece starts with a mysterious dripping, pulsing sound played mostly in one guitar, with the one on the right adding a note occasionally. The theme builds out of this like it's growing. The piece has a pulsing quality to it, and I guess that evokes the circle of the title. Brouwer isn't telling us anything about this, so we'll just have to guess. Let's hear this from about 1 minute in. I guess Brouwer is picking up on the circle from the title. The music is mostly minimalistic and keeps returning to its beginning as though we're hearing loops. At the 4-minute and 4-second mark, there's a brief pause and a character change as both guitarists play a rising line forte and dramatically. This leads to a slow theme followed by cascading figures. Each change of mood here is short-lived, and eventually there's a new intertwining minimal pattern, and this changes to others. Leading up to the end, the material decelerates until we're hearing quarter notes at a slow tempo, and this brings the piece to an end on an odd pair of final chords. It's a pretty hypnotic work. I rather enjoyed it. Tracks 9 through 12 are by the Serbian composer Dusan Bogdanovic. His Sonata No. 2 for 2 guitars, composed in 2013 for the ChromaDuo. Bogdanovic studied composition with Alberto Ginastera, of all people, and Pierre Wismer, and guitar with Maria Livia São Marcos at the Geneva Conservatory, where he now teaches. This work was commissioned by ChromaDuo in 2013. Track 9 is the first movement, Allegro. The first subject is derived from Indian Purvi Tat, which is one of the 10 basic dats or scales of North Indian or Hindustani music. And the second is a chromatic harmonic progression reminiscent of a popular song. These two elements remain integral for the whole sonata, creating dramatic tension and complementarity throughout the piece. The work starts seemingly in media res, or in the middle of things, like it has already started before we started listening to it. The rhythm is already moving, and I'm not detecting anything unusual about the harmony, so I wouldn't know it was derived from an Indian dot if it weren't mentioned. At the 55-second mark, we hear the song-like chromatic theme. It's slower than the opening, and let's hear a bit of that midway through the movement. Track 10, the second movement, Andante. The movement starts with a gently played accompaniment with the guitar on the right melodizing over that. I'm just going to go for those pauses, even though it's a pretty short sample, and get out of there. The tone remains consistent throughout the fairly brief movement, though the melodic guitar on the right has moments of agitation as the movement approaches its end. Track 11 is the third movement, Moderato. This starts with a climbing rhythm underlined by chords at points. The section ends quickly, and there's a more lyrical B section starting only 40 seconds in. The movement itself is under 2 minutes. It ends with the quick opening approach briefly making a statement. Track 12, the fourth movement, Allegro molto. A stop and start theme opens the movement. Let's hear that. The material builds in anxiety until the mood ends at around 1 minute and 30 seconds with hard string snaps from the left-hand guitar. The material then becomes a bit moody, but regains its opening energy at 2 minutes and 7 seconds and retains that until the end. Track 13, Dale Kavanagh, born in Halifax, Canada, and Dale is a woman's name in this case. This is The Ghost of Peggy's Cove, Opus 14, from the year 2021. This is also written for the ChromaDuo. The work was written in Nova Scotia during COVID, when Kavanagh walked every day along the rocks of Peggy's Cove. The piece was written on a ghost story native to the area. The ghost of a woman named Margaret is said to haunt the lighthouse at Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. As the tale goes, she and her husband moved there after losing their children in an accident. One day, in an effort to lift her spirits, her husband danced on the rocks, but tragically slipped and fell to his death. Distraught, I know, this is a really unlucky family, boy. Distraught, Margaret jumped into the ocean, taking her own life. And then there were none, I guess. Ever since, a woman in a blue dress is said to haunt the area, and when visitors get too close, she jumps off the rocks and disappears. You can hear the dance of the husband in the piece. The piece itself starts with some gorgeous-sounding, lightly plucked and meaty-sounding notes, as though plucked with the flesh of the thumb. We hear a watery rhythm afterwards. I'm going to start this about 30 seconds in. That sounds like a sort of happy theme. I'm guessing the opening is a recalling of the reason Margaret is here. It comes back in the second minute and resolves, and at the 3 minutes and 8 second mark, some strummed chords begin a new section. The rhythm here sounds somber. It builds at 4 minutes and 24 seconds into swirling, water-like patterns and keeps going back to the opening chords of the section. At 5 minutes and 55 seconds, the dance starts with a lively, happy rhythm. It stops and the arpeggiated, more somber material comes back, recalling earlier themes. The husband's death isn't depicted in the piece. Perhaps the dance is presented as a memory. We hear the opening serene, watery figures again in the 7th minute. The piece ends with the opening inquiring 4-note figures and ends with a tonic. It's a satisfying quasi-narrative-like piece. Tracks 14 through 16 are by Sergio Assad, composer born in 1952 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is his Diens in Trois Temps from 2021, written for the ChromaDuo. Assad plays tribute here to the great Tunisian-French guitarist, improviser, and composer Roland Dion, who lived from 1955 to 2016. Assad tries in this piece to capture the essence of Dion's musical evolution. Each movement reflects a different aspect of his career. All 3 tracks are named after Dion. They use his first name Roland. Track 14 is the first movement, Roland au Nord, or Roland in the North. This reflects Dion's exploration of northern themes, which echoes his recording of jazz standards, using the same set of pieces he used in his album. The harmony at the opening is fairly dark and played at the low end of the guitars. The opening sounds fairly abstract. Jazzy material comes in the first minute, and let me sample from there. In the second minute, there's a sentimental dance-like section that quickly morphs into material like the abstract opening. The jazzy section comes back at the end, sounding vaguely like Take the A Train. In fact, the melody is directly quoted just after the 3 minute and 30 second mark. And I think all the other jazz themes are also taken directly from songs that he put on his album. Track 15, the second movement, La Chanson et Roland. This reflects Dion's reinterpretation of French songs. Here, Assad uses the same set of songs Dion arranged for his album dedicated to French songs. The opening has a square phrase like a traditional folk song. The guitars fall into an appealing triplet rhythm for a moment in the first minute, then the rhythm gets a more rippling effect. It sounds like several songs are being briefly sampled in the piece. The movement has that grounded quality you get from folk songs. This is an appealing movement with a wealth of attractive melodies. And track 16 is the third and final movement, Roland au Sud. This reflects Dion's passion for Brazilian music. Echoes of Dion's famous piece Tango and Sky are woven into the fabric of the piece. The opening has a dancing quality. and about midway through that sample you could hear the tango theme. You can hear it again at 1 minute and 5 seconds or so. In the second minute, the music starts flowing more freely, and the piece ends with some squeaking effects from the guitars before it reaches its final cadence. So here we have 4 contemporary pieces that give the listener a light challenge, and it's light mostly due to the light sound of the acoustic guitars. The Kavanaugh piece has a narrative quality and harmonic textures that are appealing throughout. For me, that was the most enjoyable piece on the album. I also liked the Brouwer piece for its minimalist-leaning, continuing patterns. The 3 multi-movement works were more of a challenge, but those movements are brief. Sergio Assad's salute to the guitar playing of Roland Dion is packed with memorable melodies, but they go by so fast that they leave you wishing you could hear more. I guess you'll have to seek out Roland Dion's albums. Iannarelli's tribute to Frida Kahlo brought different approaches to its brief movements, and Bogdanovich's sonata may take a few listens for its brief movements to sink in, though it's got a lot of appeals as well. The ChromaDuo do fine justice to all of these works with their seamless duo playing. It's very impressive when you have guitar duos so locked in like this. It's an interesting and sometimes adventurous program.
I was really taken with the program here as well. The Iannarelli pieces are all very different, creating unique moods, and the range of guitar techniques is really impressive and surprising. The Brouwer is very rhythmic, becoming kind of hypnotic in a folk music type of way, a lot of different sections. The Kavanaugh's charming with fine melodies, and I thought a bit of pop sentiment. I was really taken into the melodies there.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then the Assad pleases with the jazz melodies in the first movement, a different character in the second movement completely, and those Brazilian kind of ideas in the third. And the ChromaDuo impress with both great technique and musicality. It's a great collection of guitar music, excellently played. Okay, over on the jazz side, we're going to start out in Europe, in Sweden, as a matter of fact, with Swedish trumpeter Karl Olandersson. And I've got a little bit of practice to butcher another language this week. We've done our best to try to pronounce a lot of different languages, but we haven't worked on Swedish yet. And so some of the spellings and the pronunciations are not really intuitive to English speakers like us.
Yeah, let me tell you a little story of an encounter I had with a Swedish woman. She was trying to teach me to pronounce Swedish, and she said, "Oh, this word it sounds like ugh." So I imitated that, and ugh. And she said, "No, not ugh, ugh." And I couldn't hear the difference between the two things. It was so ridiculous. It was like that Get Smart routine about the craw,
Right. Yeah, there's some sounds like the SJ sound that sort of comes from back in your throat a bit. It seems a bit tricky, but we'll do as bad on Swedish as we've done on all the other languages. Anyway, Karl Olandersson's Hurry Up and Wait on Stockholm Jazz Records. It came out on November 1st, and Karl Olandersson is born in 1978 in Sweden. He moved to Stockholm in 1997 and studied for 4 years at the Royal College of Music, and he has become one of the top trumpet players in Sweden. His first album, called Introducing, was released in 2003. The second one is called I Like the Way You Shake That Thing. Interestingly, released only in Japan in 2005. His third album was Plays Standards, which came out in 2010. This recording here is his fourth with his quartet that he started in 2017. He's worked as a studio musician too, recording for pop musicians like Ariana Grande, Demi Lovato, as well as many Swedish artists. And from 2008 to 2011, Karl was the head teacher of trumpet at the jazz program at the Royal College of Music, but he decided to quit that to focus on his trumpet performance. So on this recording, Karl Olandersson, trumpet and all compositions, Magnus Hjorth on piano, Martin Huersted on bass, and Daniel Fredriksson on drums. And we'll get started with the title track, Hurry Up and Wait, and it's an attention-grabbing opening. Olandersson starts it out solo with a teasing lickety-split 4-measure lick that will be part of the melody. It gets 2 measures of space before the answering phrase and a little drum help from Fredriksson. After we hear that twice, everybody is in on the melody. The B section has a descending line that will bring you right back to Dizzy Gillespie's original tune, Bebop, and then rides the breaks into some interval jumps before the final A section. Worsted walks the bass into a piano solo from Jorge that has a lot of space. Let's hear this album get started. Jorge gets more animated as his solo goes on. Let's jump back in at the end with jarring chords into a break for the trumpet solo. And that's the tune. An exciting start to get things going. Track 2 is Ongoing. It's a happy and playful melody for this tune. It's in an AABA form with 12 measure A sections. The rhythm section adds a lot to the fun with stop time feel and the piano doubling the melody on the B section. Let's hear it get started. Jorge is up first for a piano solo. Let's jump back in for some of this tasty piano on this tune. Olandersson's trumpet solo is melodic and fun with some half-valve notes and snappy double-time lines. Worsted has a bass solo with a good sense of bounce. It's a bit recessed in the mix, and Olandersson is back from the B section of the melody to a little extended ending. Track 3 is called For Them All, a trumpet cadenza opening that goes from soft and muffled to high screams. Let's check it out. The main melody is a slow, seductive minor Latin theme. It has a repeating A section and an extended contrasting section that builds up tension with pleading trumpet phrases. The drum toms add to the sparse atmosphere. At this slow tempo, it's hard to get a lot in a short sample. Let's jump in for a section of the melody phrase that shrinks into softness into Olandersson's improvisations later on. George takes over on piano next with a solo, and Olandersson returns with the contrasting section and a final pleading scream before a soft ending section. Track 4 is Let's Get Happy. Fredriksson starts this one out with solo drums with a focus on pitch and textured sounds. Let's hear a bit of that into the 40-measure melody that will get you feeling happy a little bit into the tune. And Yorch is off on a solo from the break there that includes some smooth running lines and then funky choppy chords. Let's hear some of Olandersson's puckish solo with half-valve fun and snappy phrases. That's nice and sassy, and he goes right on connecting it back to the melody for a fun finish. Track 5 is The Flu, and Worsted gets this going with a descending bass line intro into the 32-measure A minor melody. The piano interaction with the trumpet melody is neat, switching up from doubling to chordy backing. There's an extra 2-measure drum break into the start of a trumpet solo. Let's hear this one get going. And let's hear Yorch's piano solo on this one with a lot of punchy left-hand excitement. And it's back to a final time through the melody with the bass walking out a little to an extended ending. Track 6, Sentimental, a sparse solo piano intro from Yorch with unexpected intervals gets this started. Let's jump in from where he takes it into a waltz tempo and then the others join in, the trumpet mostly for backing the piano melody with soft lines and trills. It's unusual and pretty at the same time. Jorch plays on, improvising with ghostly backing lines from Olandersson's trumpet, getting back to the melody, and ends the piece alone on the piano. Track 7, WM. This is a unique tune. The melody is in 3 sections. The repeating first 14-measure section has a neat trumpet lick that works into improvisations over walking bass from the 8th measure. The longer middle section builds syncopated tension before the trumpet lick is back for the final section. Let's hear it get going. And Olandersson continues on improvising. Let's join back in for some more of his solo. Changes lend a Miles Davis 60s kind of mood to the piece, and Jorch has a piano solo next. Very nice cymbal work from Fredriksson sticks out behind too. It ends up with another run through the melody with some final phrase repeats. Track 8 is Buddies. Jorch sits this one out, giving us a chordless trio. The melody is in an A-A-B-A 32-measure form. Worsted takes the first section, and Olandersson joins in unison on the repeat, getting out his plunger mute for some fun, and Worsted switches up to a loping walk for the start of the B section. It's sparse and fun, so let's take a listen to this one get going. Worsted continues on with the bass solo with some backing from Olandersson's trumpet. Let's hear a little bit more of his solo into the trumpet wah-wah solo. Olandersson continues on, getting back to the final melody section with a cute ending to wrap it up. And the recording ends up with a ballad, Insight. Olandersson's tone is warm and gorgeous but delicate. The melody has a nostalgic feeling. It's in an AABA shape with shorter 6-measure A sections that have a phrase that will stick in your ear. The B section lifts and has a little pause. Let's hear it through that much of the tune. To hear the A and B section there. Anyway, let's hear some of his improvised ideas over the A sections of the melody. His tone, articulation, and the high slides there remind me of a ballad recording that Japanese trumpeter Terumasu Hino made, Unforgettable, way back in 1994. After that, Yorch solos over the B and A sections, and then Olandersson is back with the melody B and final A sections with a little coda ending. It's an enjoyable recording. Olandersson shows a wide range of expression on the trumpet with a warm, sometimes very soft tone, contrasted with gleaming high notes and a lot of dexterity in fast phrases. His original tunes have a strong sense of jazz history, with pleasing melodies in swing and boppy styles, and some modal ideas too. The structures are often unique. I like how the sidemen here often get to start out tunes on their own with extended intros. The rhythm section has an intuitive sense of working together. Yorch shines on piano solos with great phrasing, and Fredriksson's drums are nuanced and textured. And Worstedt's bass gets some spotlight too, especially with the solo in Buddies. Olandersson's trumpet solos are inventive with lots of variety of articulation, fine melodic ideas, and interesting phrasing. I'll definitely be going back to check out his previous recordings.
Yeah, Buddies was a track that stood out for me too. A few others did as well. I thought Karl Olandersson's approach to these compositions was really interesting. They were kind of unpredictable and really enjoyable too. I think of the light wavering candle flame of a tone he gets at the beginning of For Them All. You don't really hear that too often. And I particularly enjoyed the happy-go-lucky overall tone of Ongoing. That was just kind of a feel-good track. And the snappy bass line on Buddies too. The record has some appealing upbeat tracks and soulful ballads, a lot of variety. Olandersson delivers an appealing mood on both types of track. There's classy playing all around in this band. I also enjoyed Yorch's piano playing. And I thought Olandersson, he's a man of many moods. And it was a really enjoyable album. Well recorded, too, I thought. This sounded great.
It's hard for a trumpet player, too, to be the only horn. You're in the spotlight the whole time, and you've got to rest your chops, too, and make sure you're ready for the dynamic moments in the solos. But he does a really good job. And like I say, I like how he gives his sidemen a lot of space to work with, too. Enjoyable recording. All right, next, another trumpet player, a favorite of ours, Mr. Brian Lynch, with his new recording 7x7x7. It's on Hollistic MusicWorks, his own music label. It came out October 25th. It's not been in our playlist that we usually put up on Deezer because Deezer just finally got one track, just the first track of it.
What are they up to?
I don't know what's taking them so long. Anyway, hopefully it'll be up soon. You can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and also the full album is on YouTube already too. Brian Lynch was born in Illinois, but he grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, getting a degree from Wisconsin Conservatory of Music. He was a member of the Horace Silver Quintet from 1982 to 1985 and the Toshiko Akiyoshi Jazz Orchestra from 1982 to 1988. And simultaneously, he was playing and recording on the Latin scene with salsa band leader Angel Canales and Hector Lavoe. He began his association with Eddie Palmieri in 1987, and at the end of 1988 joined what ended up being the final edition of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. In 1986, he recorded his first album as a leader, Peer Pressure, on Crisscross, and since then he's recorded more than 20 albums as a leader, including 2016's Madera Latino, a Latin jazz interpretation on the music of Woody Shaw, which is a favorite of ours. He also produced Samara Joy's new Portrait recording that we heard just a few episodes ago, so he's a man of many talents. While this recording is a unique concept album, you can find information about the ideas included here from Brian Lynch's homepage, which I'll quote from. It says, 7 pieces performed by 7 musicians, with each track clocking in at exactly the same length, 7 minutes flat of music.
How'd they do that?
I don't know. Brian designed the project in a novel and distinctive modular format, allowing for the interchange of ensemble sections and individual parts across all 7 compositions. It goes on to say Brian's interest in the number 7 goes back to childhood. Quote, I remember that at the very beginning of learning about music, the fact that there was the same number of notes in the scale, in the diatonic major and minor system, though I didn't know about that until later, as there were days in the week, intrigued me. There was also a book I read of my father's about the mystical significance of numbers that piqued my interest during that time. 7s have been something that I have put a lot of time into over the years, both in my music and in organizing my time and thought. One more note from his homepage. It says, as part of the overall 7x7x7 project, supported by a Knight Foundation New Works grant with additional support from an University of Miami Arts and Humanities Fellowship, alternate realizations, remixes of the 777 music will be dropped via Hollistic MusicWorks label over a period of 49 7x7 weeks from the album release date on October 25th, including remixes by guest artists. There's a lot going on with the plans for this music here. On the recording, Brian Lynch, trumpet and compositions, Craig Handy, tenor saxophone, Alex Wintz on guitar, who we've heard previously with Nick Finzer and Stephen Feifke, Luis Perdomo on piano, we heard just recently on Tom Harrell's alternate summer recording, Boris Kozlov on bass, acoustic and electric.
Yet again.
And yeah, we've heard him uncountable times. But it's going to be neat to hear him on some electric bass that we don't usually hear. And Kyle Swan drums, Murph Aucamp percussion. And the number 7 will play into significant ages of his life. And there's some information from the CD notes that tell us a little bit about each one, starting with the first track, In the Riv, 7x3. This opening track goes back to Lynch at age 21 in the back of his mentor Tony King's boat-tail Buick Riviera, driving down from Milwaukee to Indiana to appear at his first ever jazz festival performance. The tune starts off with a sequence of piano and guitar chords. There's a tight, straight beat groove and an interesting bass line that sounds doubled up by guitar and piano under a mostly unison horn line. Let's hear this recording get started. Now, this is going to be a tough recording to sample from to get a full impression of the compositions, because rather than working with simple tune structures, Lynch has penned extended, evolving arrangements that progress in new directions as the tunes unfold. From where we just ended, things take a bluesier turn. Handy's up first for a muscular tenor sax solo with snappy phrases. Wintz follows on guitar with exploring lines and a nice bite to his articulation, but let's check out some of Lynch's trumpet solo on here. Really nice arc to that solo with connection of melodic ideas. Perdomo has a piano solo too from there before it connects back to the bluesier melody section we heard before. Track 2, High Point of the Hang, and this is 7x5. The notes say an oral evocation of Lynch at 35. Touring constantly, playing in all the styles and with the greats, having myself quite a time and pulling it all off. I should say you'll notice as we go along that these 7 times certain numbers that equal ages are not in sequence. So we're getting a musical sequence of ideas rather than going through the order of his life. Not 7 here, but a 9-beat ostinato that sounds ominous on bass and guitar. Kozlov has switched to acoustic bass for this one. There's more Latin flavor with percussion and syncopated horns that turn to happier phrases. Let's hear the first section of the arrangement. change of mood there and more inventive snaking horn lines. The ostinato returns and the horns percolated into a solo from Lynch. Wince has some more bite on his solo here, exploring some darker ideas, so let's check out the guitar solo on this one. Follows, getting floated along by Wince's rhythm guitar. Kozlov gets an acoustic bass solo and works back into the ostinato for some drum and percussion build up to the return of the horns with the melody. Track 3, Sympathetic Vibrations. This is 7x7, so I guess age 49. It says, taking total control of my music for the first time and with the help of my friends achieving something lasting. A slow and steady beat on this one. The horn lines flow gently, but in unpredictable directions, and underneath the bass line has some interesting independent movement. I'm going to sample it from about a minute in, where there is a return to the opening melody section so that you can hear the interesting transformation to some complex but groovy bass and guitar lines that will get a layer of horns on top. Back to the original idea there, and then Kozlov is up first for an electric bass solo. We're used to hearing his acoustic bass on all those great Positone releases, so let's check out his electric solo on this one. Nice harmonics there at the end, cool playing. Lynch follows from there. I like his relaxed phrasing that settles into the groove. Perdomo has a smooth piano solo into some backing for Swan to work up the drums, back into the funky guitar and bass lines and horn part we heard before to the end. Track 4, On the Silver Road. This is 7x4, so I guess 28 years old. It says, gaining some notice on the international bandstand, a goal achieved and a place in a lineage realized. And the melody here will definitely remind you of Horace Silver. It's a cool 36-measure construction with a bluesy atmosphere, cool triplets, and sounds thick, taken in unison on trumpet, sax, and guitar. Is up first for a solo here with fluid lines and bluesy touches. Let's check out a solo from Handy on this one. Oh yeah, nice ending on that solo. Lynch follows, and this solo has a great sense of space and anticipation and some high register forays. Perdomo picks up Lynch's last lick idea to get his piano solo started. The horns and guitar are back for a final melody section that is a little abbreviated, maybe to make it fit the 7-minute time constraint. Track 5, Academy Blues. This says, my journey into higher education with its blessings and sacrifices, the real teachers are the students. Lynch has had faculty positions at University of Miami, New York University, and the North Netherlands Conservatory, and also taught at the Stanford Jazz Workshop, and now a tune in a 7-beat meter. The melody is 16 measures with kind of a bluesy progression, but plenty of harmonic surprises. Let's check it out. Up first for a solo there, followed by Handy. Let's hear another one from Lynch on this tune. nice harmonic navigation there. Kozlov gets a fat, woody acoustic bass solo next, and then Wintz gets some horn backing for his solo. Allkamp gets to ramp up the percussion, warming up to a new melody section for the horns before the original melody and a 4-measure coda come to take it up to the requisite 7 minutes. Track 6, Greeting on 87th Street. This is 7 times 6. Guess that would be age 42. The notes say, at last, real love and someone to live life with fully. So I guess that's when he found his romantic partner. This sounds like it's in 9/8 time, but with a drum hit on beat 7, of course. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro into the 32-measure melody that features legato flowing horn lines. Let's hear as much of it as we can in 1 minute. Lynch is up first for a solo and comes busting out bluesy, but with delicate touches. Handy follows with a soulful R&B infused sax solo, and Wintz is energized in his solo too, but it's about time we check out one from Perdomo. Join back in there from the midway melody point, bringing it to a somewhat soft ending. And the recording ends up with track 7, Finnegan's Garden. This is 7 times 9. The notes say it pays tribute to Lynch's beloved Pooch, Finnegan, presiding over his family's backyard refuge during the difficult period of the pandemic, the time in which this album was conceived and written. This is the most rhythmically complex piece. I'm not sure what the time signature is, maybe 10/8. The bass and guitar riff become hypnotic and horns add on before working into the melody with more rhythmic and harmonic surprises. Let's hear it get started. After the melody, it returns to that guitar and bass riff as a segue to Lynch's trumpet solo, so let's hear one more from him. Perdomo has a solo next on this tune from there. Drums and percussion get an interlude over vamping, and the horns are back with a final tricky melody section ending with the riffy section. Brian Lynch is certainly one of the top jazz trumpet players today, but more than that, he comes up with interesting musical environments and concepts for his recordings that inspire him and his sidemen. As I mentioned, one of our favorite is Madera Latino, and now this number 7 centered recording is interesting as well. What's cool about it is that there's enough to enjoy on the surface with the great grooves and Latin percussion for just a casual listen, and a lot of deeper layers of structure, interesting harmonies, and complex meters to satisfy your intellectual curiosity too. The musicians all sound excited to be involved, and the solos are inspired and creative from Perdomo, Handy, Wintz, and Lynch himself. A fun chance to hear some of Kozlov's electric bass too. Here's to 7x10 for Brian Lynch and whatever comes next.
Oh yeah, I really dug the grooves on this album, and they just kept coming in every track.
Yeah.
It was pretty exciting. They gave the soloists inspiration to go off on some imaginative solos, or like you said, probably because they liked the concept as well. And all of those were enjoyable to listen to too. Like I liked Boris Karloff as well. Lynch likes to be up in the high range of the trumpet when he solos. It's always an exciting sound coming from him. And Boris Karloff, a bassist we really love, stepped out and delivered some strong grooving solos on some tracks on this album. This might be the most exciting work he's done this year. I really liked his playing on this record, especially in his solo work here. I also thought guitarist Alex Wintz was a standout with his clean tone, classy style in solos, and the addition of Murph Outcomp on percussion added greatly to the grooving nature of the tracks on this album. It was pretty exciting, and I'm going to want to pick this one up.
Yeah. In our final recording, we'll go to Canada for the Carn Davidson 9 Reverence. We've got a nonette here. It came out November 1st. This seems to be released on their own label. The Carn Davidson 9 CD9 was formed in 2010 as a collaborative project between Juno Award-winning artists, Canadians trombonist William Carn and saxophonist Tara Davidson. It's a vehicle for their own compositions and arrangements with this unique instrumentation. 7 wind instruments, acoustic bass, and drums, so no chordal instrument. Reverence is their 4th studio album, presenting 2 new suites of music from co-leaders William Carn and Tara Davidson that pay tribute to some of their musical heroes and heroines, and the movements of these are mixed in the program. The notes go on to describe William Carn's Pan-American Suite as being dedicated partly to his Latin heritage and his love of Brazilian music. Being part Costa Rican, Carn named the movement Florencio after his father, who was his first music teacher without even realizing it. Thanks to his immense passion for music of all kinds, the other movements are inspired by the Brazilian composers Sergio Mendes, Hermeto Pascoal, and Antonio Carlos Jobim, whose sense of melody, rhythm, and playfulness have been a lasting inspiration to Carn's musical journey. And Tara Davidson's Saxophonists Suite is dedicated to Dick Oates, Joshua Redman, Christine Jensen, and Kenny Garrett. These 4 contemporary jazz saxophonists have all deeply influenced Davidson and given her immeasurable amounts of joy and inspiration through their extraordinary musicianship and saxophonists, improvisers, and composers. Davidson sought out to compose a movement for each of these saxophonists that would convey elements of their musical voice to the listener. So, on the recording, Tara Davidson, alto sax, flute, and some vocals. Kelly Jefferson, tenor saxophone and clarinet. Shirantha Bedaj, hope I pronounced that right, baritone saxophone and bass clarinet. Jason Logue, trumpet. Kevin Turcotte, trumpet. William Carn, trombone, and a little bit of vocal action as well. Christian Overton, bass trombone. Andrew Downing, acoustic bass, and Ernesto Cervini on drums. Special guests, Dick Oates on alto sax. We're going to hear him on the first track. And Mark Kelso on some auxiliary percussion on track 4. This was recorded May 5th and 6th, 2024 at Revolution Recording Studio, Toronto. Recording, editing, and mixing engineer David Hermiston. Mastering engineer Jeff Fedge Elliott. And producers William Carn and Tara Davidson. The recording is going to start out with Fire for Oates. Dick Oates, that is, a great saxophonist and teacher. This is Tara Davidson's composition. We're going to hear some exciting arranging on this recording right away. This opens with some swinging sax lines that contrast and alternate with a reticent bass ostinato. The panning on the recording helps to hear the part separations. When the brass come in, they'll be on the left channel while the saxes are on the right. Let's hear this recording get going. This is pretty exciting stuff. The arrangement develops with more swinging exchanges between sax and brass sections, working up to an alto sax solo from guest Dick Oates. I'll join in midway from his solo so that you can hear the horn backing pushing him on to more and more intense lines. Section of the horn arranging is exciting too. The bass ostinato peaks back in and we get some screaming trumpets at the push to the end. Track 2 is Groove for Joshua, also by Tara Davidson. Cervini mixes up a nice straight beat drum groove to get it going and gets joined by an ostinato from Downing. Let's join in about 30 seconds in, just before the horns are in, with a joyful sounding melody that also has some surprising harmonic twists. Bass note section takes it into a really cool horn section of bell-like muted horn tones that stack on each other in staggered waves. This album has so many interesting little sections in the arrangements that can't be captured in short samples for each tune. The horns build it up again into a tenor sax solo from Kelly Jefferson. I'll join in toward the end of his solo as well so you can hear the cool backing horn lines. The saxes get some new super funky lines from there into a full band arrangement and then a return to the happy melody. The repeated bass note section returns as a vamp for Cervini to get a drum solo that doesn't let up under a full-powered horn ending to a slowed-down gospel-y ending. Track 3, If Not Now, Then When, by William Carn. It's time for some timbral variety here with flute and bass clarinet along with muted brass. It's a nice blend on the opening longing section. A muted trumpet emerges over an interesting bass tremolo. Let's check this out. New horn lines will connect to bowed bass for a while as the horns flow on with a thick arrangement. Let's join in on some of Carn's plunger muted trombone solo that opens into a full toned solo as it goes on. You'll get horn backing lines coming in, making a funky groove. Things turn softer again with a tenor sax theme. A new section with vocalizations from Carn and Davidson floats over a bass trombone line, and then a heavy groove, and then tempo speed up, push it to a sudden ending. It's an interesting tune with many transformations. Track 4 is also by William Carn, Saudet. An upbeat Latin beat gets this going into a busy horn arrangement with some bari sax hanging out and volleying of horn parts. Let's check it out. Keeps transforming and gets an injection of extra percussion from Mark Kelso for a new rhythmic feel. Let's come back in for some of the Latin excitement into an alto sax solo from Tara Davidson. in to whip up more excitement, backing her up. Then the whole band gets some vocalizations over bass and drums. The horns come back and build it up to an exciting finish. I guess they would have had to have recorded the vocals separately, but it's still a neat effect and an exciting ending. Track 5, a Tara Davidson tune, Wonderment for CJ, Christine Jensen. This starts with a brass arrangement featuring trumpet. The saxes join in with a new rhythmic idea. Let's hear it up to that point. The bass gets a rhythmic groove underneath, and the arrangement grows and swells with sweeping lines. There's a break with just light cymbals carrying on around 2 minutes in, and a restart with a new idea and full band arrangement into a trombone solo from William Carn that gets some horn backing with flute in the mix. Kevin Turcotte is next for a trumpet solo, so let's check out some of his playing here. Another pause there, and the woodwinds led by the flute come in to take it to a final section with yet another rhythmic feel. The rhythmic sax idea we heard earlier returns to some simultaneous trumpet and trombone improvisations and continues on to end it. Track 6, William Carn's Just Because, a Latin beat gets things started into a sax-led melody arrangement with muted trumpet tones mixed in. It builds excitingly in layers. Let's check it out. Trumpets get screaming before it comes down softer with just saxes before the trombones join in, and then the trumpets. Jason Logue gets a trumpet solo on this tune, so let's check out some of his playing once he's got it going. Things build up again from those soft, choppy sax lines. I like the snappy rhythms of the brass layers as it works to the end. Track 7, Florencio by William Carn for his father, a minor longing feel with a descending sax line to start, the fluffy syncopated trombone underneath is cool, more horns chime in as it comes to a hold and a trumpet melody emerges. Let's take a listen. After the trumpet melody, tenor sax takes over. Another slight pause leads to a soft but full band arrangement. Sax and full arrangement come again to a tenor sax solo from Kelly Jefferson that we'll check out midway to get to his passionate ending. Sax melody and flowing full arrangement carry on with trombone and bari sax standing out in the ending arrangement. And the recording ends up with Joy by Tara Davidson for Kenny Garrett that is. A fun arrangement here with a bass and bari ostinato figure that gets horns built around it. Bari drops out to alto sax taking over before the bari is back in and things build up. Let's hear it. builds up, taking some interesting harmonic directions, and Sharantha Bedaj gets a Barry sax solo, so we have to check some of that out once he gets going. The saxes are back with a joyful theme that gets joined by the brass. It ends up with the bass kind of dismantling the ostinato over a tight drum beat. This is an exciting and enjoyable recording. The 7-horn lineup sounds bigger than it is, sometimes like a big band. No chordal instrument leaves all the harmony to the horn arranging, and that is skillfully and entertainingly done by Carn and Davidson. Their original compositions are fresh and constantly evolving in ways that are hard to capture in short samples. They make a good use of timbres available with this ensemble, with Barry sax, bass clarinet, and flute making a wide range of tones, and mutes in the brass giving more variety. The use of different combinations of instruments in the arrangements is creative throughout. All the horns get solo spots, and their unique personalities come through their improvisations, cheered on by creative backing arrangements. All fans of great jazz arranging will certainly enjoy this recording.
Yeah, exciting is right. There's some really creative arranging on this album. The compositions themselves are pretty complicated, not just with thick harmonies, but shifting sections. I'm especially thinking of tracks like Wonderment here, which goes into many unexpected new sections. These almost sound like multi-movement kind of tracks sometimes. Like they seem to go into completely different moods after a certain section ends. The tracks also tend to have themes repeated after solos to separate it like from the next solo, which I kind of liked too. The playing throughout is light-toned and inviting. The music is appealing. As you heard, there were some great grooves, and the record just kind of takes you on a bit of a ride. It's a really enjoyable listen, and it kept me intrigued throughout. I really liked it.
Yeah, I like the idea of not having a piano or guitar, chordless. We hear that all the time these days. We're going to hear some of it next week again, but with a large ensemble, I can really focus on all the neat arranging in the horns. And that's it. Episode 189 in the bag, and we've got episode 190 already set up. What's on the classical menu next week, Mike?
For classical music, we're going to go south of the border, the U.S. border, that is, and we're going to have music from Central and South America, starting with the Huehuetenango songbook, music from 16th century Guatemala. Then we move into the 20th century for the next two, and a little bit into the 21st. We're going to hear some 20th century Brazilian solo piano music. That, of course, means Villa Lobos, but a few others as well. Then we've got music from the Americas 1, a new series. This is music of Venezuela, which I'm completely unfamiliar with. And that's by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Domingo Hindoyan. And he's the conductor who did, with the same orchestra, the Roberto Sierra record that we talked about last year, that you picked as one of your albums of last year. So looking forward to hearing this.
That sounds good. I've got a little bit of a South American connection with my first pick, which is called Oco. That's by French trombonist Fidel Forneron, and that's a cordless trombone trio. We've heard a lot of sax cordless trios, and we haven't heard trombone yet, so that's going to be interesting. And then we've got guitarist John Hart with his Love Is recording, and that's a trio as well, and that's going to feature a cornetist that we really like, Kirk Knufke.
Yeah.
I always want to hear more of his playing. And I managed to get 2 cornets into one episode. We've got Swedish saxophonist Ellen Forkelid and her new release, Songs to Keep You Company on a Dark Night, which features Tobias Wickland.
Yeah, cornetist that we both really like as well.
And so that's going to be a quartet recording. And just looking at the notes, she said it was inspired by Kenny Wheeler.
More Kenny Wheeler.
Got Kenny on the mind since we listened to Jason's album. And so I want to find out more about the connection to that recording. So that's what's coming up next week. If you want to check out those recordings during the week, as we do, there'll be a playlist up on Deezer and a link to it on our Facebook page as well. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Any final thoughts for this episode, Mike?
Well, let's not forget that Friday, November 22nd, is the feast of Saint Cecilia. She's the patron saint of music, so make sure you make that a musical day and show your appreciation.
Sounds like a plan. I plan to make every day a musical day.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're really interchangeable for me.
Exactly.
They're always musical days.
All right. Well, check out those tunes for next week early if you have time. If not, join us again in episode 190 to hear samples and our impressions of them all. That's it for episode 189. We'll be back again next week. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.